Silicon Valley hums with the invisible pulse of $1 trillion. But just miles from the sterile glass palaces where they code the future, the neon bleeds out into the choked gutters of Winchester Boulevard. Out here, the American dream isn't downloaded, it's dismantled, piece by rotting piece. Look at the asphalt. It's a bitter February night in 2026. The rain is trying to wash away the oil slicks, but it can't wash away the crimson pooling around a pair of counterfeit sneakers. A 17-year-old kid. He should be worrying about graduation, about whatever digital ghost haunts his phone. Instead, he's staring up at the sodium streetlights with eyes that don't blink anymore. Two grown men are sitting in the back of a black and white cruiser right now, hands cuffed, knuckles bruised, breathing hard. They didn't know this kid. He wasn't a rival. He wasn't a mark. He was just the unfortunate friction in a society running entirely on empty. A few exchange words at a traffic light, a sudden spike of adrenaline. Then, the hollow crack of a 9mm shattering the California night. People call it road rage, a spontaneous tragedy. But that's a lie we tell ourselves so we can sleep. The truth is, this city has been suffocating on its own exhaust for years. The trigger wasn't pulled tonight. It was pulled the moment this town decided some lives were just collateral damage to progress. The scariest part isn't that a boy died for absolutely nothing. The scariest part is how completely unsurprised everyone really is. Welcome to the first blood of 2026. Let's see what crawls out of the wound. The rain doesn't cleanse Winchester Boulevard. It only makes the grime slicker. Elias Thorne stepped out of his rusted Plymouth, the engine dying with a pathetic, wheezing cough. He hadn't been back to San Jose in a decade. They called this valley the beating heart of the future. But down here, beneath the concrete overpasses, the city was a rusted beast. It breathed exhaust and exhaled failure. San Jose didn't welcome him back. It merely tolerated his intrusion, waiting for an excuse to swallow him whole again. It was a living, breathing antagonist, feeding on the desperate. Elias pulled his trench coat tighter against the biting chill. He was in exile, chased out of the precinct 10 years ago for seeing shadows in corners where the brass only wanted sunlight. Now, he was standing over the chalk outline of a 17-year-old kid. Two local men were in custody. Case closed, the captain had announced to the press. A tragic, spontaneous traffic dispute. But Elias didn't buy the spontaneous narrative. The silence of the industrial park felt too heavy, too deliberate. The corrugated metal warehouses watched him with hollow, rust-weeping eyes. He ducked under the yellow police tape, his boots crunching over shattered safety glass. The neon sign of a defunct liquor store flickered across the street, casting a sickly, jaundiced glow over the crime scene. Elias knelt by the dark stain on the asphalt. His gloved fingers traced the trajectory of a missed shot lodged in the concrete barrier nearby. A 9mm. Common. Unremarkable. But as he brushed away a pile of wet, decaying leaves shoved against the storm drain, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just a bullet casing hiding in the sludge. It was a tarnished silver coin. A 1921 Morgan dollar. Its face deeply, violently scratched out in an erratic, jagged pattern. Elias felt the phantom ache of an old bullet wound in his shoulder. 20 years ago, his very first homicide involved a drifter executed near the old rail yards. The same scratched-out silver coin left at the scene. A case that went ice cold, buried to protect the city's pristine tech utopia image. This wasn't road rage. The ghosts of San Jose weren't resting. The cold case had just burned its way back to the surface. Elias sat across from Marcus Vance. The interrogation room smelled of stale coffee, cold sweat, and 20 years of cheap lies. Marcus was 50, with hands like cracked leather, a man ground down by the rusted gears of the local cannery. He hadn't shot the kid. His partner, Cole, had pulled the trigger, but Marcus was the one driving the truck. A traffic dispute, Elias said, his voice barely a rasp over the hum of the lights. That's what you told the uniforms. A kid cuts you off on Winchester, and suddenly it's the OK Corral. You expect me to buy that? Marcus stared at the steel table. He was reckless, disrespectful. Elias leaned in, the scarred silver coin feeling heavy like a gravestone in his pocket. Tommy Miller was 17, played tight end for the Wildcats. I saw you cheering in the bleachers last Friday, Marcus. I saw you sitting 3 pews behind his mother at St. Jude's on Sunday. This town worships its high school boys on the turf, treating them like demigods under the Friday night lights. You pray with them in the pews, washing your sins in the same holy water. But come midnight, when the factory whistles are silent and the bank foreclosures roll in, you slaughter them on the asphalt. Hypocrisy is the only booming industry left in this zip code. Why? Marcus swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing the deep lines of his face. He wouldn't meet Elias's dead-eyed stare. It wasn't about the car, Thorne. You think you know this place? You've been gone too long. There's a sickness here. It gets in the blood, the pressure. It builds. Tommy Miller wasn't just a kid. He was a vessel for the town's ruined dreams. But in a place where the American dream is rotting on the vine, even the brightest stars carry a heavy tax. Tommy had secrets, debts that a 17-year-old shouldn't even know existed. Elias left Marcus to his silence and moved to the next room. Cole, 25, eyes wired tight with paranoid, violent energy. The shooter. It was self-defense, Cole spat out before Elias even sat down, his knuckles bruised from punching walls. The kid was reaching. I saw a flash. The only flash was your bruised ego, Elias murmured. You're angry. At the factory that laid you off. At the system. You took it out on a boy who had the whole world ahead of him, while yours ended 5 miles from where you were born. Cole slammed his fist on the table. Shut up! You don't know what that kid was involved in. Elias paused. He slowly reached into his coat and placed the tarnished, scratched-out 1921 Morgan dollar on the steel table. Cole's face instantly drained of color. His bravado vanished, replaced by a primal, suffocating terror. He looked at the coin as if it were a venomous snake about to strike. Where did you get that? Cole whispered, his voice trembling, the violent energy completely broken. They told us. They said the debt was queer if we handled the kid. He said the coins were a warning, the mark of the old guard. Elias leaned forward, the shadows catching the hollows of his face. Who is he, Cole? But Cole just pressed his back against the cinder block wall, shaking uncontrollably. The web wasn't just a series of lies to cover up road rage. It was a trap, and the spider had been watching them all along. Elias drove out to the edge of town, where the streetlights surrendered to the sprawling metallic graveyard of the Vance cannery. The Vance family didn't just employ half of this forgotten zip code. They owned their debts, their mortgages, and their silences. He didn't go to their gated estate. He headed back to his motel, room 114. The neon vacancy sign buzzed like a dying wasp against the relentless rain. The door was already cracked open, swaying gently in the freezing wind. Elias pushed inside. The air was thick with the stench of ozone, cheap copper, and scorched feathers. On his unmade bed lay a visceral medieval warning. A dead crow, its black wings pinned wide to the mattress with rusted railroad spikes. Stuffed into its beak was a charred piece of paper, a torn page from the St. Jude's Sunday hymnal. And resting in the hollow of its chest, another scratched-out silver Morgan dollar. The message was deafening. They weren't hiding in the shadows anymore. The untouchables were reminding him who owned the night. 20 years ago, a nameless drifter was found with a silver coin shoved down his throat because he saw the Vance transport trucks moving untraceable narcotics across the county line. That was the old guard, a ruthless syndicate operating behind the pristine facade of local industry and civic pride. The precinct brass had ordered Elias to drop it back then. He pushed, and they systematically dismantled his life. Now, history was rhyming. A 17-year-old kid named Tommy Miller doesn't just catch a bullet over a bruised ego at a stoplight. It was an execution. Tommy was a mule, a high school hero using his Letterman jacket and the Friday night lights as a shield to move product for the town's elite. He got greedy, or maybe he found a conscience. Either way, he became a liability. The traffic dispute was just a staged theater of cruelty. Elias left the bird rotting on the bed. He drove straight to the Pelican Club, the velvet-lined sanctuary of the town's power brokers. The dining room was empty, save for one man sitting at the head of a long mahogany table, Mayor Richard Vance, methodically slicing a piece of rare steak. "You always were a stray dog, Elias," Vance said without looking up, wiping a smear of blood from his lip with a white linen napkin. "You come back here, digging up old bones. But this town is built on bones. It's the foundation. We provide the jobs. We provide the order. If a few weeds need to be pulled to keep the lawn green, the city understands." Tommy Miller was a weed? Elias's voice was a low, dangerous growl. Tommy Miller was an employee who breached his contract, Vance replied coldly, finally looking up. His eyes were empty, calculating voids. Just like your drifter 2 decades ago. Cole and Marcus were just fulfilling a union obligation. Leave it alone, Thorne. You can't arrest a whole town. The rain washes everything away eventually. Elias leaned over the table, placing the burned hymnal page next to Vance's wine glass. Not this time, Richard. Because Tommy didn't just breach a contract. He kept an insurance policy. A ledger. Vance's hands stopped moving. The silver knife hovered over his plate. For a fraction of a second, the untouchable king of San Jose looked utterly, profoundly terrified. Elias sat in the freezing dark of his idling Plymouth. He was completely isolated. The moment he left the Pelican Club, 2 black and white cruisers had started mirroring his terms, a silent reminder that Mayor Vance owned the streets, the badges, and the night. Elias had no backup, no authority, just a hollow badge and a 20-year-old bullet wound that throbbed like a metronome at his shoulder. He needed the ledger, the physical proof of the narcotics shipments hidden beneath the high school's athletic funds. But Tommy Miller wasn't stupid enough to keep it at home, or at the school. He kept it where the untouchables wouldn't dare look, where the dead kept the secrets. Elias didn't go to Tommy's fresh grave. He walked to the older section of the cemetery, stopping at the crumbling mausoleum of Tommy's father, a man who had conveniently died in a workplace accident at the Vance Cannery 5 years ago. Elias knew the final, horrifying truth wouldn't be found by luck. It required a toll, a sacrifice of the soul. He had to desecrate the only sacred ground this rotting town had left. He wedged a heavy iron crowbar under the marble slab of the crypt. The stone resisted, biting back. The rusted iron slipped, slicing Elias's palms open. Warm blood mixed with the freezing rain as he finally shoved the slab aside. There, hidden beneath a decaying, petrified funeral wreath, was a small, plastic-wrapped notebook. Elias pulled it out with bleeding fingers. The pages were filled with dates, weights, and routes. And at the very top, Mayor Richard Vance's private, offshore routing numbers. The sacrifice was made. The dark night had peaked. Now, San Jose was going to burn. Elias didn't take the ledger to the local precinct. He knew the rot went much higher than the mayor's office. The district attorney, the judges, the state reps, they all fed at the Vance trough. Instead, he mailed it to a federal prosecutor 5 states away, buried in a package along with Tommy Miller's scratched-out silver dollar. 2 days later, the FBI raided the cannery. Mayor Richard Vance put a bullet in his own head inside his oak-paneled study before the tactical team even breached the front door. Cole and Marcus pled guilty, disappearing forever into the black hole of the federal prison system. But as Elias drove his rusted Plymouth out of San Jose, watching the sterile neon signs flicker against the relentless rain, he didn't feel like a savior. The gears of the machine were jammed, but the factory remained. Another politician would take Vance's place. Another desperate kid would eventually bleed out on the asphalt of Winchester Boulevard. San Jose didn't wash away its sins. It just learned to hide the bodies deeper. The truth rarely brings salvation. It only leaves survivors. For more deep dives into the psychology of crime and the darkest corners of the justice system, make sure to subscribe to Forensic and Factions. We don't just recount history, we reconstruct the nightmare.